right, well, welcome back, everybody. We're going to get started with the next presentation. And I'm Cherie Silas from Tandem Coaching Academy. And I'm going to be presenting a topic today called reflective supervision. And I'll be explaining to you a little bit about what supervision is. You may have heard of this before, you may not have, especially if you're in the US, not a term that's used often here. But it is used often over in Europe. So before I jump into the presentation, I'd like you to use your chat box. And I want to get a little bit of feedback on what is your role. I'd like to understand if we've got team coaches, agile coaches, enterprise coaches, who all is here in the space with us. All right, so agile coach. Any other coaches? All right, I see a bunch of some agile coaches, some scrum masters, so coaches of individual teams. All right. Yep, looks like there's lots of agile coaches. Well, great. One team leadership and individual coach. So great. Well, it's good to know that. And because the topic that I'm talking about today is specifically targeted at coaches, whether you are an individual coach who coaches just, one-on-one individuals, executives, if you're a team coach, a scrum master, an organizational coach, all of you count. And so let me throw my slides up for you. So we'll be looking at reflective supervision. And so I want to explain this topic to you. And when I first heard about this topic, it was actually in a book. So I'm a Jeff Watts fan, and he's got a book called The Coach's Casebook. Some of you may have it, some of you may have read it. And in his book, it's really like conversations that he's had with clients and things. And one of the things that I kept reading in there was that I brought this case to my supervisor. And I was, or no, he would say, I brought this case for supervision. And I was like, that's interesting. I wonder what supervision is. I don't know what that is. We don't do that here. So then I got in and started studying it and finding out what it was. And I was like, this is really cool. I think I want to investigate. So I joined some group supervision sessions. I joined for individual supervision. And what I found was that it was extremely helpful to have another person to reflect on the work that I was doing as a coach. And it really helped me to become more aware of who I am as a coach and how I was interacting with my clients and why I was interacting that way. And it helped me to look at changes that I wanted to make to improve my own practice and improve my own my actual coaching. So what reflective supervision first is not is don't let this word supervision fool you. So supervision, we often think like in other spaces that supervision is I'm your boss, I'm your supervisor, I'm above you, I'm going to do performance management, I'm going to tell you what you're doing right and wrong. And none of that is true about reflective supervision. And so what reflective supervision is actually, it's a reflective practice. And so the two people involved or the group involved in the supervision, it's about taking a super view of the work you're doing as a coach. So stepping back and looking at the bigger picture and seeing what is it that I'm doing as a coach? How effective am I? What's happening in an individual client? When I'm working with an individual client, here's a case that I want to bring for supervision so that we can reflect on it from a higher level. So supervision is different also than mentor coaching. So while supervision is two peers meeting together, we come together as complete equals and we're just looking at the work you do. We're reflecting on it. I'm bringing my ideas. You're bringing your ideas. I'm telling you what's coming up for me. And as I hear you talk, what's spinning around in my head. And so we look at the work you're doing together. That's different than mentor coaching, which is in mentor coaching, we're actually looking at your ability to perform the core coaching competencies, the core competencies of being a coach. So if I'm mentoring you as a coach, I'm helping you perfect the skill of coaching. If I am partnering you in supervision, we're looking at who you are and how you show up and the impacts of that on your coaching and how your client is even impacting you and how you might want to change that. So big differences where mentor coaching, I would be above you. You know, we would take it from the perspective of I'm a stronger expert than you and helping you to come up to my level. And supervision, we're both at the same level. We're just peers. I'm not there to criticize or judge. I'm there to reflect with you. So what is it? It is a practice where you focus on how you're being so that you can better serve your clients. The supervision space is also a non-judgmental space where you can reflect on what's happening with your actual clients, whether that's a team, an individual, or an organization. And so some of the reasons why a coach would join supervision are these, right? So it gives us the ability to discover more about you and your clients and how you're going to serve them better. And here's some of the things that you'll look at. We will actually look at your client. What's going on with your client? Who's the client? Now, client remains confidential. You don't need to tell your supervisor who that client is. You can call him Jack from Alaska. You can call him, the square client. You can call him the purple client. You can call him whatever you want. And there's no intention for you to disclose the actual client because your client interactions are actually confidential. So we'll look at your client and what's happening in their world. We'll look at, well, what have you done? The work you've actually done with the client, the interventions you have made. What kind of questions have you asked? What kind of things have you partnered with them on? What have y'all dug into? All those things. We'll look at the relationship that exists between you and your client. What's happening between you in your work as a coach. This can be really important in your work with an organization because a lot of times there's a lot of different relationships happening and sometimes they get kind of tense. We'll look at your internal process. What's happening for you when you're working with your client, when you're like in the moment, in that session we're talking about, what's happening? And also what's happening to you right now as you reflect back on that. What's coming to mind? What's happening in your mind, your emotions, your body? How's that work impacting you? And then we'll also take a look at the larger system impacts. What's happening in your client's world, in your client's space that's impacting the work you're doing with them? What's happening in your own world? Well, that might be impacting it. And what's happening in the larger world around us that might be impacting the work you're doing. So just a few things that you'll look at in supervision and why you might want to have supervision. So as I mentioned, you can do individual supervision where you and someone who is a trained supervision provider can work with you and be partners. And then you can also do supervision in groups, which is really cool because when you work in groups, one person still brings a case. Hey, here's this client case that I want to reflect on. And you've got thinking partners behind just the supervisor. So that supervisor is going to kind of manage the process and facilitate the process. It's a coaching session. And your thinking partners will also give input and ask questions that can cause you to reflect at a deeper level. And because you're getting multiple perspectives, you actually have more things open up to you for you to understand your work a little bit better. Um, Supervision in groups can also be more cost effective because one person's not paying for the supervisor's time. You're all kind of splitting that cost. So it can also be less expensive to do that in groups. And so my purpose for introducing this to you as agile coaches is because what I believe is in the agile space, um, there are a lot of people doing coaching. Not all of those are actually professional coaches. Um, and if you're unsure what professional coaching is, it's a discipline all by itself. It's a set of skills to partner with the client, and it's things like being able to ask questions and give reflections and insights and challenge and support your client for them to own their own change. And so it's a core skill for an agile coach. And a lot of people don't know that there's actually a discipline called coaching, and they confuse consulting and mentoring and training for coaching. So they call themselves agile coaches when in reality they may be an agile consultant or an agile mentor, and not actually walking in the discipline of an agile coach. So, what I believe is that this practice of reflective supervision can not just help agile coaches who do understand professional coaching, but I believe that it can also help coaches who actually don't understand the discipline of coaching, because this is like coaching on your coaching, which means they're going to experience what it's like to be able to think without being told what to do, and to be able to reflect, and how that reflection can actually help them improve, and how to be empowered and respected, and all those things that a coach does, which I believe will cause them to be more curious about professional coaching and how it can help them become a better coach. What I do know about agile coaches who are skilled in this discipline of professional coaching, is that they're better agile coaches. They're better because they empower their clients. They're better because they ask more questions and then they give answers. They're better because they respect and honor their client and see them as not broken, which gets a lot of results beyond just, I'm going to come in and tell you what to do. So this is another reason why I think reflective supervision is so important. So let's say you engage a supervisor and you say, I want supervision. I don't know anything about it. So I'm going to help you understand a little bit about it today. So first, how do you prepare for a supervision session? So when we're going to have a coaching session, we prepare, right? We think about, well, what is it I want out of this session? What do I want to accomplish? What are my goals? How am I going to know I'm successful? What's the topic I want to talk about? And so supervision is a lot like that. Of course, your client remains confidential. So in this conversation, there's a supervisor, there's a coach, and then outside of the conversation is the client and the client's world. Right. So you're going to let the client stay confidential, and you're going to bring in what the industry, not just me, calls a notable incident. So when you're in your day-to-day world working with clients and you interact with them, um, a discipline of professional coaching is to reflect on the work you're doing. So maybe taking a few notes, like I just got finished doing a retrospective, I just got finished doing some kind of an organizational improvement activity. Let me take a few minutes and reflect on what happened. And if there was anything kind of weird that happened, maybe I got a little frustrated with the client. Hey, let me take note of that, because that's something I probably want to reflect on and dig into a little bit more. It may be that it went really, really awesome, really, really great. And I think I want to reflect on that a bit to understand more about, well, what actually went great. So it can be just normal circumstances. It doesn't have to be something extraordinary. but just reflecting on your day-to-day interactions with your client can be helpful. So I usually do just a short write-up of like, hey, what's the background? What is the actual incident that happened and why is this important? I don't pre-analyze these. I just kind of stack them up. And then when I go for a session of supervision, I flip through them and I say, well, which one do I want to reflect on today? So that's how you prepare. And then what you'll find is when you enter into a supervision relationship, you're going to look at a couple of different areas. So the focus areas are you as a practitioner. So you as a coach, your client and your client's world, and then the system and relationships that exist between you and around you. So that's the main focus areas of supervision. And oops, sorry, I had to find my mouse. So when we're in the supervisory space, this is a great metaphor for looking at the work we do in supervision. So the supervisory spaces are these. There's a directive space, and we'll talk more about these in just a moment. But there's a directive space where, as a supervisor, I'm more giving information. There's the exam room where we're evaluating what's happening and how you're doing coaching. There's a passive space where maybe you as the coach are listening a bit to what the supervisor's saying. Hey, I've got some experience in this. I want to give you some input. There's a restorative space, which is really about celebrating, healing, because if you've been an agile coach for more than 15 minutes, that you know that, okay, sometimes you just need to get things out because you're frustrated, hurt, angry, whatever, because of what's happening. There's an active space where we take your problem and actually like, let's dig into this problem and see how you can solve it with your client. And then the main space, which you'll notice it's much bigger here, is this reflective space. And so the main purpose of supervision is to reflect on you and what you bring to the table and how you're interacting. And there are these other spaces. You'll notice the size of the picture kind of coincides with how much you're in this space compared to other spaces. Okay? So let's just look a little bit at each one of these spaces. So the observatory or the discovery space, this is a primary space for supervision. And what this space is for creating you awareness and you, the coach, about the work you're doing. Right? And if we're in this space, the supervisor's role is to be a peer and to support your reflection on the work you're doing with your client. Your role in this space is to be the explorer and be open to reflecting and be vulnerable to reflecting and be willing to dig in and say, what's happening? What's going on? What was I experiencing? What was I thinking? Oh, this is what I probably missed, right? So what we do know from supervision is that 40% of the challenges you have with your client go back to the coaching contract. 40%. So it's in this space often that you'll stop and say, what's happening with the contract between me and the client? What's missing that something's off? So if we look at this space, some of the lenses that we're going to reflect through are the client, your interventions, and the client-coach relationship. So that's one grouping, and that's kind of the grouping on the outside, right? This is not, it's more about the client than about you. And then on the other side, it's reflections about, it's me as a supervisor, what's coming up for me, my internal process. Where am I being kind of triggered listening to you? What am I experiencing as I listen to you talk about what's happening with your client? What are some what we call parallel processes, which means what's happening between in the relationship with me and you, that is actually a reflection of what's happening in the relationship with you and your client, and what can you learn from that, and what's happening in the bigger system, the world around us. Um, and part of that bigger system is things like the Agile community, Scrum Alliance, the scaling community, the coaching community, as well as your client and their stakeholders and what's happening in the company around them, what's happening in the world around us with COVID. All of that is the larger system. What's happening in your client's family and in your family that might be interacting, what's happening for you right now. Maybe you're stressed and tired, and that's why things are happening this way. So we've got both of those spaces. And then in the middle there, it's about what's happening for you in those spaces. What was happening when you were with your client before, during, and after? And what's happening for you right now while we're talking about this? So this is Peter Hawkins' seven-eyed model. And so it's a really great model for supervision. It's also a model for coaching if you modify it just a little bit. But this is one of the underlying models that we use in supervision. So if we look at the next space, this sitting room or the restorative space, this is another primary space for supervision. So these two spaces, the discovery space and the restorative space, these are primary. They're the two places where we should be most of the time when we're doing supervision. And so when we're in this restorative space, the primary goal here is to debrief. Let's celebrate what happened. Let's debrief what happened, and let's take a look at it. So my role as a supervisor is as a colleague, and I'm there to debrief with you and to celebrate with you, and to just look at that and from a restorative perspective. Celebrating actually restores your ability to have energy in the work you do. Your role as a practitioner or a coach in this setting, if we're in this space, is the same. You're a colleague. We're just colleagues, and we're talking about what happened. So it's to debrief and to celebrate. So secondary spaces, so spaces where you will often go, but it's not like the main purpose of supervision. Main purpose of supervision is discovery and restoration. And we also work in these secondary spaces more by need or by request. I find the most used secondary space is this active space. And this active space is about coming up with collaborative solutions. So my role as a supervisor is to be an interactive thinker and learner with you. I'm helping you think of different perspectives. I'm helping you think of different options. I'm learning along with you, and we're collaborating to figure out how you're going to be different with your client in order to maybe get past a block. Maybe you feel like your client is not moving forward and you don't know what to do to get past it. So we'll collaborate, we'll brainstorm a bit on, well, how do you get past it? Maybe you don't know how to approach the client with, something that's going on. Maybe, you feel like maybe it's time for us to end this engagement and you're not sure how to approach it, or if you should approach it. You're not sure your client's getting value. These are the kind of things that come into this active space. And so this is why I see it used most often as a secondary space of supervision. This space now, I would classify more as a third level space. So primary, secondary, and whatever the right word is for beyond that, that's the kind of space this is. And so this space, this passive space, or the lecture theater, is more as requested by the coach. And so the goal in this space is for the supervisor to impart advice or information, experience that they've had. And so my role as the supervisor is more in my experience as an expert, here's what I know. And maybe it fills the gap of what you don't know or what you're not sure of. So it's a little bit of a mentoring space from the traditional definition of mentoring, right? You know what you're doing. I know a little bit more, and I'm going to give you information to kind of help you come up to that next level. And so that's what's happening in this space. And the practitioner's role, the coach's role, is to listen and to take that information in. And then we'll shift to another space, and then let's sort through the information and what you want to do with it. These are usually brief. So if we have an hour-long supervision session and we switch to this space, we're probably going to be there for 2 or 3 minutes tops, and then go switch to something else. Just enough for me to give you enough information for you to say, okay, I've got it. Now let me do something with it, right? So that's why this is more like a base level space. Then another third level space is the exam room. And again, this is as requested by the coach. So this is a little bit more of the bringing the mentor coaching from a professional coach perspective in. And it's a space where the supervisor actually is doing a little bit of evaluation and feedback of what the work the coach is doing. And it's by request. So if we're partners in supervision and you don't ask me to evaluate your performance, I'm not going to do that. I will only give you my comments and feedback on your performance from a competency level when you ask me to go into that space. And because this is not mentor coaching, we're not going to book a session and stay in this space the whole time. It'll be something we shift to. Often it'll be you as the coach say, okay, this is what I did and I really need some feedback on, was this the right thing? Am I out of line here? Is there an ethical barrier that I'm breaking or passing? And so I'll give you a little bit of feedback. I'll give you my opinion on what I see based on what you told me. Right? So my role is to assess and give feedback. The coach's role, while we're in this space, is to be open to that feedback. So if you ask me for my opinion, at least be open to it. You don't need to go do what I said, but also don't get offended if I tell you the truth, because that's what you asked for. So that's what's going to help. And then this last space here is a directive space. So this is like, they named this the office, the people who came up with this model. And this is required by circumstance. So I only shift to this space when needed, and it's every single time I have shifted into this space momentarily, it's been because of an ethical dilemma. Or something where the ICF code of ethics is really close to being breached. For example, I had one where the coach was thinking that maybe their client needed a counselor, but they didn't want to lose the client. They wasn't sure what to do. And then so I asked permission to step into this space for a moment and help them to understand, well, this is what the code of ethics you live by is, and these are your options, right? So it's those kinds of things that will come up. And then so as a guardian of the profession, I have an obligation to help make sure there's clarity where there may be ethical dilemmas. That doesn't mean I'm going to call and report you as an ethics violation. It's just that, hey, I'm a peer, I'm a partner. I don't want to see you get in trouble. I want to make sure you understand clearly what the ethical boundaries are here. So in this space, my role as a supervisor is to safeguard the public and to comply with the requirements of the profession. And so basically, I'm going to give some direction. As the practitioner, your role is to follow that direction. Now, you're at will to do what you want to do. You leave the supervision session, you can continue and do exactly what you were doing. And I mean, I guess that's kind of on you. If you violate ethical guidelines, then that's kind of on you. But I would think that what you would want to do is take that advice to heart and say, okay, let me figure out how to do this. But I'm not your boss. I'm not your supervisor. I'm not going to fire you. I'm not going to report you. That's on you. So I'll tell you what some spaces are that aren't supervision. And what's not supervision is the managerial space. I'm not your boss. I'm not your supervisor. I'm not your superior. I'm not judging you. I'm not rating you. I'm not deciding if you get a raise. Just like a manager probably shouldn't coach their employees, manager shouldn't try to do supervision with an employee either. It needs to be a third party because you are crossing some ethical guidelines there or boundaries there. The other space that's not supervision is the avoidance space. So we just come in and chit chat and hang out together and we don't really reflect on your work. We can be friends, that's just not supervision. So if we're going to be in the supervision space, let's get some work done. And then we can go have coffee or a beer or whatever on at another time. Okay. So I want to break for just a minute. I'm gonna close the presentation because I believe that there's probably a lot of questions around supervision and how it might be used in an agile space. So I want to open up the floor and hear some of your questions, some of your thoughts, even like, whatever it is, like, this sounds weird. Why are we doing this? Why would I do this? All that stuff. So what do you have?
Practically, I'm just thinking like, do I have the sense of these different rooms, or I have the ability people to kind of use those rooms with me in a work environment kind of thing? I kind of give that, hey, these are the different spaces you can interact with me. And basically, so how does that work?
Yeah, good point. So basically what I'm not a proponent of is you all go and try to do supervision.
Yeah.
Because you're not trained.
Good
But
point.
you should work with a trained supervisor who understands the discipline. And so with that said, with your question, we work together in partnership. What space do we want to be in? Where do we need to work today? And so just like when you're an agile coach and you intentionally shift from stance to stance, it's the same thing with this. So the supervisor and the coach work together and say, well, where do I need to be? Do we need to be reflecting right now, or do we need to be solving right now? And so you kind of do that dance together. And so, yeah, so what I recommend is that, or let me tell you what the European Mentoring and Coaching Council recommends is that for every 35 to 40 hours of coaching you do, you should have 1 hour of supervision. So most people don't coach full time, but that might mean that you engage in 1 hour of supervision a month, 1 hour of supervision a quarter. For them to renew as a coach and get your coach credential renewed, you have to have at least one supervision a quarter, 3 times a year. Not a quarter, 3 times a year, if you're certified by the European Mentoring and Coaching Council.
So if you're agile coaching and you're working with tons of different teams and you have scrum masters that you're working with, is there some variation of this, or is there some, I don't want to say lower level, but something that could be used in a work type of environment?
Yeah, that's where I think the group supervision comes in.
Okay.
Because you can actually put together a group of people. I'm running a couple of groups right now, and it's people from different disciplines, from different industries, and we're coming together, and I'm leading that supervision group. So someone brings a case each time. This could actually be something that's used internally I wouldn't want to be like the boss doing supervision. And you may want to have somebody kind of external to the organization that's neutral, being the
Mhm.
supervisor, but you could bring all of those scrum masters or all of those agile coaches in one group if they're able to be vulnerable and open in that group together.
Yeah.
Because if there's competition and they've got to worry about, well, you know what, if I say that I wanted to knock my client out, Ted's going to go tell my boss. Well, that's not going to work either, right? It has to be a safe, confidential space anytime you've got any kind of group coaching going on. So yes, companies could hire a supervisor to be like on staff and do supervision with all of their coaching coaching people at whatever level they're at. And as a trained supervisor, you might be a part of an organization already and do that type of work.
Thank you so much.
Mhm.
Hey, Cherie. So what does it take to become a trained supervisor?
I can't
This is
see.
Sharon.
Okay, I'm sorry. I was looking to see which person was talking and I couldn't see you. Okay, so similar to coach training, you would go to a program that teaches supervision, and so it's a different discipline. So the program I went through was a 9-month program, and so we learned to do supervision in groups, learn to do supervision in with individuals, and then before you can get certified, just like with ICF at least, there's 100 hours of supervision that you have to do with clients before you can actually apply to be credentialed, and you have to be doing it for at least a year before you can get credentialed. So it's very much like the professional coaching. And so supervision's a lot like coaching on your coaching. So there's a
Mhm.
lot, it's a lot like coaching. However, um, we're not digging deep. It's different than coaching because we're looking at how you show up as a coach. So it's a little bit different.
And you were mentioning that it's bigger in Europe than
Mhm.
it is in like US and Canada.
Mhm.
And so I'm just curious, kind of within the North American space, how many practitioners might there be out there, or, you know, just some sense of that.
Yeah. It's getting there's there's probably a tenth of the practitioners in the US as there is in Europe, because in Europe, people who are credentialed with EMCC and other European councils, they're required to get supervision. ICF doesn't require it. However, I want to show y'all this, the new coaching competencies that ICF released that are going into effect um, in 2021. This is how they define embodying a coaching mindset, and it is now a core competency. That's a lot of words on the screen, but what I want to show you is a few things. This 2.3 marker, the coach develops an ongoing reflective practice. They're not saying you have to do supervision, but you have to have some kind of reflective practice. Um, Uses awareness of self and intuition. That's a part of this. Seeks help from outside sources when necessary. Mentally and emotionally prepares for sessions. So all of this, these are the spaces that supervision actually cover. So while ICF is not saying go do it, we're requiring it 3 times a year. What they're saying is you have to do something. You can't just keep jumping into coaching sessions cold and jumping out cold and not growing and reflecting in between. What else?
Do you also look at helping with structuring agendas? Because what I find very often is that the clients don't necessarily have really a clear agenda. And when you go with individual coaching, it's a bit easier because the person will, I mean, you can work out what it is, or work out something at least for a session. With systemic coaching, it's a bit different. That unless you have a structure and you prepare your sessions and you have a journey and you reflect on it, it's very difficult to be effective. It becomes very scattergun, in my view.
Mm-hmm.
And the only way to regain sort of a good coaching stance in the engagement with the client is to have that agenda and have I mean, you said 40%. I'm even surprised it's only 40%. But it's bring the structure that will actually create the context for a proper coaching stance.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, as part of the supervision, do you help with that part?
Yeah, so that's often the conversation that we're having, is because as a supervisor, I'm hearing what you're saying, and the thing that's coming to mind for me is, I wonder what your coaching contract looks like. This sounds like that could be an issue. And then so we'll pull it out, not like physically pull it out, but pull it onto the table and talk through that. What's it look like? What's missing from it? What is it that's the miss that's happening between you that really should be cleared in the contract? And so it may be that we stay in that reflective space and investigate together. It may be that we move to the active space and actually start solving together. How could you approach this? What do you need to work? How do you need to go to your client and re-up the contract or change the contract? Might even need to move into a space where I say, okay, well, this is what I see you actually doing wrong in my experience. And I think if you did this, it would help you. So we may shift into different spaces depending on what's needed. But I will tell you that the coaching contract is something that comes up all the time in supervision, either because there's a little miss or because there's a big miss. There's often not a overall contract for the engagement. And especially when I'm working with agile coaches, what I see all the time is not only do we not have an overall engagement strategy, but the client hired me to be a consultant and I want to be a coach, and it's not clear. And the client wants this and I want this, and so no wonder we've got a problem. I bought an apple, you're a pear, and you said I'll be an apple. Like that doesn't work.
Yeah,
So then
and
how do
what
we fix
often
that?
happens is you try and help the client come up with an agenda, and you become an advisor about the agenda. And most of the work is about what they should be thinking about rather than actually coaching them through that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So
Which is,
that comes up all.
I mean, it's very difficult to avoid that trap when the client is not on board with it.
Yes. And that's where the original coaching agreement comes in. Do they?
Mhm.
And from an ICF perspective, it is the coach's responsibility to teach the client what coaching is. And when the client wants something other than coaching, it is the coach's responsibility to explain the difference between coaching and whatever that other discipline is. And so where do we really need to go? Should I be coaching this person? In an agile coach scenario, maybe I should be mentoring because that's what they really want. So then we may need to adjust that contract. And maybe the contract says I'm doing some of each, especially agile coach. You're going to be like, in my contracts, it says I'm going to do some consulting, some training, some coaching, some facilitating, some mentoring. And I explain the differences and how I may shift between them and what it's like to work with me. All right, so we've got about 7 minutes left. Any other questions or comments? Alex, you're on mute.
Okay. So I'm curious what you are taking out of your supervision sessions as a supervisor and bringing to your coaching practice and what you learn.
Oh, so much every single time, because we're both there to learn, right? So I'm learning more, and it depends. I learn some from every client, every session. And so I'm learning a lot about the discipline or the structure that I need to bring more to even more to both my coaching practice and my training practice. So I train coaches, and I'm seeing more and more the problems that are coming into supervision tell me that I should be training this stuff in coaching because it's obviously being missed by the industry. So I'm bringing a lot of that into the work I do. I'm raising up, training, and mentoring coaches, and then I'm bringing more structure even to the work I do with my individual coaching clients, so that I can make sure that I'm looking at those things.
So in the follow-up, what is the number one thing that you would change in your training based on what you learned in supervision?
There's a couple of things, so I don't know about number one. But
Two number ones?
yeah, there's a couple of number ones. So big ones is teaching coaches the discipline of reflecting, preparing for a session by reflecting, and debriefing from a session by reflecting. The power that brings to the coach and the coach's ability to actually work with the client better. And then, so I think that's like the biggest one I brought. And then the other thing that I brought, because of the new core coaching competencies, is teaching about supervision. And I actually added supervision to our programs. So you learn coaching, you have mentor coaching because that's required, and we have supervision as a part of that program also, so that coaches experience the power of it while they're still learning. And then when they leave, it's kind of like, this is just the way we do things, right? You get up in the morning, you brush your teeth. That's the way you do things. And it's not a question of whether we do or don't. We know we do. So that's the other thing that I bring, that I've changed.
Well, some people wouldn't brush their teeth.
This is true. They may not need supervision. Or they may not have teeth. All right, 4 minutes left. Who else has a comment or a question? I'm almost glad y'all didn't answer, because I decided I wanted to ask a different question. If you've had supervision practice before, if you've been in supervision, group or individual, I'd love to hear from you. Like, what was that about? What was not like what happened, but what was the impact to your coaching, and what was the experience like? Anybody here had supervision? Matt, you're on mute somewhere.
You guys hear me okay?
Yep.
All right. Well, Cherie, I did some supervision with you, and it was eye-opening for me. There's that conversation that we have with ourselves as coaches, and it's like letting somebody else in on that, and having that conversation open up, and learning so much about my own coaching, and having somebody to bounce things off of. And it feels like you're not alone, even though coaching with experience improves, and when we learn to kind of hold our own, it's so nice to have somebody to be there for you and kind of share that space, but only as a coach. It's kind of like that secret coaching back room. You let somebody in and you go like, this is what's going on, and it's great to have that outlet back there.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. I found it very helpful for those same reasons. Like, it's almost like when we're executives, there's nobody to talk to. Like, I can't talk to my peers, I can't talk to my boss, I can't talk to the people under me. Well, as a coach, there's nobody to talk to. I can't go talk to my husband about my clients. I can't, I can't talk to my peers. So there needs to be sometimes an outlet to say, I don't know what's happening, I don't know what's wrong, but I need help thinking through it. And leaving the client to be confidential and being able to talk to another professional about what's happening. And they're not judging, they're not, they're just like, hey, we're peers. Let's look at this together from a professional perspective. So, all right, well, awesome.